family lived in Wananalo, at the back of the valley, not on the beach. And I represented Wananalo, Keolo Hills, Lanikai. It was a district at that time. And at the same year that I was elected to the State House of Representatives, I met the person who would eventually become my spiritual teacher. At that time, he was not a Roshi, he was a sensei. His name was Stanley Tonoi. And he went by Tonoi Sensei, and then eventually Tonoi Roshi. And his teacher, Omori Sogen, founded the temple at the back of the valley known as Daihonzan, CHOZEN-JI. Daihonzan meaning that it's its own headquarters. And CHOZEN-JI. CHOZEN-JI is an audacious name. It means temple. Ji is temple, and Chozen means to transcend Zen. And Zen is in itself a transcendent practice. So the notion that it would transcend Zen was quite an audacious thing. The teacher's teacher, Omori Sogen, was famous in Japan. And I believe he ended his career as the abbot of Tenyuchi, which is a famous temple in Japan. This is Rinzai Zen, which is, how to put it, very martial in its ways of being. So even our meditation, we sit for 45 minutes, we sit facing each other, we sit with our eyes open, and we do not move for 45 minutes. We sit as if we are both relaxed, but also so concentrated and focused that at a moment's notice, if necessary, we can arise from the meditative state and do whatever may be necessary. We are practicing for a particular kind of energy, a particular kind of ki-ai, a particular kind of mana. That notion of being the people who would be able to be totally at peace and in action at the same time. For it not to be separated from each other. Zen is a unique pathway that is actually a hybrid. It is a creation of Buddhism coming from India into China. And as my teacher would put it, the wind of Buddhism hit the bell of the Tao, the Taoist philosophy, and the sound that came forth was Zen. That's how he would put it. He, of course, was a music teacher, so of course he would put it that way. He was a public school music teacher. He taught at Farrington and Kalakaua, some of the other intermediate schools in the Kogi district. And it was from there that most of his students arose to begin with. They would take band from him during the day, and after school they would do martial arts. And before they did martial arts, he would make them sit meditation for 30 minutes. And then eventually all of that became CHOZEN-JI. Zen, as described by my teacher's teacher, is the practice pathway where what you are doing is you're experiencing the entire universe as the true human body. And that in that experience, not the belief of it, not the understanding of it, but in the actual whole experience of that you would then take upon the work of living as if you are totally integrated with all beings. Now, in the last 20 years or so, that one of the things I have come to realize is that my affection for Zen, and you have to have an affection, otherwise the practice is just too hard. There has to be a real reason for you to sit for 45 minutes, sitting still, and not letting your mind wander from place to place. So that my affection for Zen is because the practice of it really enhances the part of my cellular memory that is indigenous. The part that is indigenous to the Pacific, and the part of it that's indigenous to the great expanse of China. And that the notion of how indigenous people lived and their worldview has merged with my understanding of Zen. We cannot have a way in which we are interconnected with other peoples and with the universe as a whole without really returning to the indigenous part of who we are, irrespective of whether we can call ourselves indigenous today or not. So all peoples who are now living on the face of the earth, at one time, your peoples were indigenous. All our peoples were indigenous. You lived in cohesion with the world around you. You had to, in order to live and survive. You took the signals and you watched for the signs of the changes of the seasons and the ways in which the insects and the birds and the fish did their thing. And you understood that they were more ancient than you. And you came into a way in which you understood that the commons were where the work would need to occur, or the people themselves would not survive, let alone flourish. So you lived very indigenously in accordance to whatever culture it is that you happen to be in. So the cultures may be different, but the indigeneity would be the same, whether you were born in Africa, or India, or in the Pacific Islands, or in what may now be called Cambodia, wherever it is that you happen to be in, that was your existence. In Europe, wherever it is that you may have been born in. And then over a period of time, that indigeneity would have been interrupted. It would be interrupted in a way in which we would go farther and farther towards the kinds of systems and ways that we live today, which lives more in a separation of things, like more in a separation of how society is built, separation between our spiritual lives and our secular lives, between our work and our family, all of these ways in which we just separated them. We become specialists in very small things. And in that speciality, we do not necessarily recognize the connection that we have with the whole. And the separation is, to me, that which has interrupted our wholeness. But it isn't necessarily that just by being modern that we cannot return to wholeness. I don't believe that that is the case. But we would have to really practice on a very, very diligent and regular and seasonal basis to be able to live towards wholeness in a world that is not moving in that direction. So what we would have to our benefit if we were in an indigenous community, that is that the entire community would live that way. And so it would mutually reinforce that. And if you happen to stray from that, you would be reminded because, okay, you forgot that in order to make the best nets, you couldn't just make the only kind of net that you wanted. It's the fisherman who would be using the net. And the fisherman would need to give you input with respect to how that net would be the best net to catch the fish. Because if that fish were not caught by the net that you made, you would not eat, and neither would the village. But those wouldn't be things that you would describe on an analytic basis. Those would be like the intuitive knowings of the community, and everything would reinforce each other. We do not live in a world that intuitively reinforces our connectivity. In fact, especially in this country, in America, individualism is highly prized. It sits in the founding documents of the country. that we would praise life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness of the person, not so much about the common. And so, therefore, we would even think about things like justice on an individual basis, rather than of everyone as a whole. And what would it mean for justice to occur at the expense of another would not be a route that we would take. So those types of things is like, it is more difficult in when you're working against the grain of that towards wholeness. But I would say if you are in the back of a cave, you would want to look towards the opening of the cave, rather than facing the back of the cave, wondering why you are in a cave. And so it's that notion of light is something that is significant in all of many spiritual paths. We would think about light that way. And to know that light does not exist in the absence of darkness would mean that we could live in an evolutionary way. That every generation that we should hope for, that as humans we would evolve not only in our knowledge of technology, but in our wisdom of how it is that we might live together as beings, not exclusively, not even inclusively, but as a whole. So some of the work that I do now that I am a retired and recovering politician, is I do quite a bit of teaching work. Most of it is on the continent. Punani Burgess and I were ordained together at CHOZEN-JI. So we are priest sisters in that regard. We were really terrible. I think we didn't know what was going on. A teacher just said, "You're going to get ordained." He said, "You don't have to rehearse," and that was a mistake. Because it was in the Japanese tradition, and so, among other things, we're all in that formal dress. So you have to put on the underwear that's not the same kind of underwear as you wear, and then the kimono, the white kimono. We've never worn kimono before because her name is Punani Burgess, and my name is Norma Wong, and we just don't wear those things. And so, you have to put on the kimono. The kimonos don't actually fit, even though they take all of your measurements, and then they just give it the same one to everybody. Right? And so, you do that, and then, you have the obi, and the obi doesn't stay on, and so they put this stretchy thing on first, and then they put the obi, and the obi goes round and round and round and round, and then it gets tucked in, because it's not the nice kind, formal obi. It's like, I don't know, something that somebody said, if you're from a martial tradition, you're supposed to wear. So round and round and round, and then tucked in. And then I don't know why for Wahine, they tell you have to wear it here, and for men, they get to wear it down here. Okay, all right? Okay, so you wear it here, and then that means you can breathe, but this is supposed to be about breathing, and you get to breathe. Okay, and then, you forgot to put your tabis on, and now you can't put your tabis on, because you can't bend down to put your tabis on. And so somebody has to put your tabis on, and that is so embarrassing. They got to put your tabis on for you. Okay, and like that. I won't tell other stories because, Punani Burgess, and so you might tell her I told you the story. But Punani Burgess and I have done a lot of our work on the continent. And it was always a mystery to us why so much of our work would be on the continent rather than here in Hawaii. We do work here, but a lot of our work is on the continent. We realize there are lots of Buddhist practitioners on the continent. So why would Punani Burgess and I be doing that work? They could get homegrown Buddhists, people that it would not require them to pay their airfare coming from Hawaii. We have actually an added value. And the added value is that we know that the most important thing that we carry doesn't have anything to do with our practice. It has to do with our connection to people and place. And they don't have connection in the same way that we do. And so there is something that is missing that they cannot explain. And we are bringing the unexplainable to them. And bringing the unexplainable to them has helped both Puanani and myself understand that which it is that we are so fortunate to have, that is enhanced by our practice, but was not created by our practice. And that's an important thing for both of us to realize and to understand. So it's that when people talk about bringing aloha, it's not about the concept, it's not about the values, it's not about any kind of system. It really is about the embodiment of it. Without the embodiment of it, then no set of rules or values or frameworks or analysis will do it. And we are very fortunate that in Hawaii, we have a critical mass of people who have that embodiment. So I've been spending some time on Maui in recent weeks. And there are a great many people in Maui who are suffering right now. They're suffering quite greatly. And the thing that actually brings them a lot of comfort is they know that they're not alone in their suffering. They know intuitively, but also because they have heard that many, many, many people in Hawaii feel the pain that they have. So, Archie Kalepa, who I've now come to know quite well, says that Lahaina bears the burden, but all of Hawaii feels the pain. That interconnectivity, you cannot cause to occur. You cannot make people have that sense of connection. It is because we do it day in and day out all the time. We should never take it for granted. And we should always lean into it. The leaning into it is extraordinarily important because a good portion of the world is not built in that direction. A good portion of the world is fracturing in all kinds of ways. So leaning into that counts a great deal. I think I'd like to close with whatever it is I was going to say. As you notice, I have voluminous notes that I was working from. And to see whether there might be something that you might like to ask, pursue in some way, to take it where it is that you might like to go. Anything at all.
There was something you said that caught my attention. You said recovering politician.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Okay. So I had the first part of my life was very much about, and I mean really early. I went to my first party convention when I turned the age of 18. Okay, so very early in my life. And I really saw like a political life as being a way of change, right? And of change with respect to the kinds of things that the community needs and we needed to move towards. By the way, I still feel that way. So I haven't turned my back with respect to politics. What occurred is, and this would be somewhere around the time, when I was ordained. So it was right around the year 2000, in which I realized that what I was moving towards was the notion that it was actually the human evolution that might make it possible for these big changes to occur. And there weren't enough people working on that part of the scheme of things. Okay? So therefore, my particular efficacy would be better in that realm than as a political operative. Now, I say that to you, and from time to time, I get brought what I would call off the bench. Right? I get brought off the bench and brought into some kind of political conversation. It could be a campaign, or it could be a campaign, for example, where the thing that I would be consulting with a candidate around was how to be the best person that they could be, not the best person that they felt that other people needed them to be. Right? For example, or into a particular issue where it's, if we just try to come to a compromise around these issues, all we'll have is a transactional agreement. What if all parties look to the whole of it rather than to their own parts, and then look to the future, to their descendants, and say, well, how might we position this for this to be at a better place, so that when our descendants take up the cause, they'll be able to not just take it from this temporary agreement. Can we be stewards rather than just divide the mountain, for example? I got brought in on Mauna Kea, for example. I'm doing some work with Red Hill right now. Red Hill, the fuel facility. The question is really, do we accept that the water will eventually be contaminated, and to set up filtration systems so that the water is filtered before it comes to the tap? Or do we say that even if right now we don't know exactly how to keep the oil from getting to the water, that has to be our mission? Because once the oil that's already in the ground gets to the water, then all life in Hawaii in the future will be threatened. So therefore, let's do that. Let's keep the oil from getting to the water. That would be like let's say a one word would be holistic view. Another would be a view that is not only about the time that's going on right now. A lot of political activity occurs with a very finite time. And so this is saying, let's look around the corner to that time that is beyond our lifetime, and make the decisions today that would be consequential for that time, not just consequential for the next couple of months or the next year. So that type of outlook. What I realized is that I had benefited from my practice being side by side, and so I was more of that kind of person. But as an individual political operative, I thought, well, I'll have some impact, but actually bringing more and more people into that type of worldview would have a more expanded impact than just being a single political operative.
I feel like I'm making up my question as I'm going along, but something that stood out to me that you were talking about, and I feel like it really resonates for like indigenous people, is this interconnectedness, this everything reinforces each other. And what I see a lot on like social media and TikTok, being of Native Hawaiian descent, is this pain body that still hasn't gotten healed of the injustice.
Right.
And so what you see is when you see other people kind of like taking your practices and copying them, and then you see like this kind of uproar. So how do you still maintain the interconnectedness, acknowledging the pain body exists, and but also at the same time working towards the interconnectedness?
Okay. So we say the pain is caused because the interconnectedness was cut off.
Yes.
Therefore, the work that is needed is to interconnect once again. So if all you do is stay in the pain, right? Okay. Then you will not be able. You'll only be able to be within the injustice of the brokenness, rather than to be the stewards of the wholeness. Right? So it's like part of it is to understand that both sit together, not for them to be separate from each other. Okay. Which would have been like, so in other words, don't be in the Western construct of pain. So the Western construct of pain, for example, when a catastrophe occurs, soon thereafter, people talk about the recovery and we have to start healing. And I believe that they're all talking about that really prematurely. Okay, that's right. And so it's that we may indeed, when there's a catastrophe of some kind, right? It's like we may indeed like feel the pain of that for a very, very long time. Right? Okay. And healing is a pathway. It's not something that occurs because you have cleaned out the burnt roots and you're planting trees and you built a house where, a house had been burned down. None of that will actually, so there you could materially recover, which is not the same thing as healing. Right? Healing is actually a long route. And the long road of healing to me is assisted and supported by practices that move towards the actuality of that. Right? So we know that if we have a wound, right, on our body, that first of all you have to know that the wound exists. Right? So when you have psychic pain, you may not acknowledge the pain, right? But if you have a wound, you know that there's one. You make an assessment of what will be required with that open wound. And one of the things that you do is you cover it. But if you recover it, you do not say, I covered it and it is healed. You know that the covering is only to make it possible for it to heal. In other words, to come into a closed space, right? To not have the world come upon you. All of that, right, is to help with the process of healing. But just because you've covered it doesn't mean that it is healed. When we sit only in the injustice of things that have occurred, we also ignore the stories of that time that were about bravery, about hope, right? About people making huge decisions that would be consequential to descendants, that would do these things that would allow for not that moment to have something, but for many generations downstream to have that. And recognize those. We don't give enough importance to those. We don't realize that, okay, right now, we actually have that. We have that responsibility too. All injustices may not have been taken care of, but we actually can't just keep looking to that. We have to actually hold that and reach out to the far future, as some of the people of that time did too. So the people of that time made that decision. My Native Hawaiian grandmother went to normal school, this thing called normal school. That meant that upon graduation, she could have a certificate to teach in the school. And so she was a public school teacher for 40 years at Ka'ahumanu Elementary School. And I didn't know until just before she passed that she was a native speaker. Because as a public school teacher, she could not speak Hawaiian in the classroom. She would want her son to succeed, so she did not teach her son Native Hawaiian. And I didn't know until just shortly before she passed that she was a native speaker. And for a while, I was pretty upset about that. Until I realized that the gift that she gave to her son is that no matter how little money there was in the household, if he wanted a ukulele, he got one. If he wanted to go to piano lessons, he could go to piano lessons. Because he loved music and he loved to sing Hawaiian music. And even though they weren't allowed to speak Hawaiian, he sang Hawaiian. And therefore, the language was preserved in its entirety. She did what she could, basically. Right? She did what she could. You know, my father is 97. He can be found once a week at a karaoke bar, singing Hawaiian songs. He brings his ukulele. I haven't quite understood the notion of bringing your instrument to sing at a karaoke bar, but it works. Right? Okay? Right? The fact that the Native Hawaiian language has emerged here in Hawaii so quickly, and many indigenous peoples throughout the continent are struggling to bring it back. And they keep coming to Hawaii to try to learn from Punana Leo, from the language immersion schools. What is the secret to that? And I don't even think Punana Leo understands the secret. The secret was, even though the language was not spoken, we named our streets, Hawaiian names. We played a lot of Hawaiian music. There was never a garage on any weekend night, and most weekday nights too, that wasn't filled with kanikapila, right? Okay, everybody knew the songs. Right? We had 2 Hawaiian radio stations, okay? And so the language itself continued to be in our experience, even though we could not speak it fluently as a language. And so when they started the immersion schools, no one had to be taught how to pronounce the words. Right? No one had to be taught how to pronounce. They may not know what the word means, but they could recognize it. They could, even the way we speak English is in the lyrical style of our mother tongue. Okay? So it has lived in us, which is to say that there are many ways for injustices to be cured. You want to look at a curing. The least satisfactory ways are the political ones.
That's for sure. That's been proven.
It's been proven, right?
I think it's, so for me, like witnessing so many of our people still in that active pain body, I think that is the hardest part for me. Like, I know I understand the healing of the pain body in a different sense. And so like when I still see this rage that is very active for them, like I just want to offer them salve.
So to me, we have a mind construct and we have a physical body construct. And I believe that actually the healing of the mind comes the quickest through the body. That if you try to actually heal the mind with the mind, you are in a, well, first of all, you will go first through delusion before you reach any truth. Okay? That's a very difficult thing to hear. So, relearning how to breathe, right? Relearning how to breathe, which is why, you know, to me, the cultural practices, people are misunderstanding getting back to the cultural practices as a return to, you know, your roots. What the cultural practices are is they're literally physical practices that we would engage in which we would only be engaging in it. We would be focusing on it, be concentrating, we'd be making beautiful things, we would be growing food, right? We would be connected to the outdoors and the outside. We will be an active agent in creating something. And that is which restores us. Now, the fact that it happens to be connected to our own culture is a bonus, but it need not be. So which is to say that cooking in of itself, it's like if you want to heal yourself, as I say to people on the continent, you can't say to people here because we don't have Trader Joe's. But I basically say, cooking does not mean you buy the pre-packed packages from Trader Joe's, you throw it together and you mix it up with a salad dressing. Okay? Because cooking, which is something that used to be required in order for you to eat, is a practice that would have to be done many times during the week. And paying attention to that, paying attention to the food that you're going to eat and that you're going to give to others would be a way in which you could practice all kinds of healing. If you don't pay attention to that, many things will go astray. It will go astray with your health, but it will also be about the energy that you have either put in or not put in. Yes.
I think I got an aha with what you were saying, which is getting back to those practices that invited people, right? In which, like, you can sing a song by yourself, but you sound better when other people sing with you.
That's right.
You can play an instrument, and that instrument can be moving and beautiful, but it sounds better with the orchestra.
Yes.
You can cook, right? But it's better when you have more ingredients.
Yes, and if you cook for others, right, there's a joyful
And you
aspect.
invite others to cook with you.
And there is a connection to the actions, other actions we occur. Archie Kalepa and the Leali'i Homestead, which sits Malka of Lahainatang, literally would have suffered a lot more if they were people who practiced with other people through very many islands in the canoe community. And so they knew how to do work with each other, how to organize with each other. They had friendships with other peoples. And so when they were in that moment of need, like the call went out, the kahea went out, and many peoples from various islands made sure that the kinds of goods and supplies that they needed, it would be able to come to them, even if government at that moment was not able to provide. And truthfully, all of government at that moment had to concentrate on that that piece of land that was gone. And people would have to flee and had no friends and relatives to go to. And so they had to put every single government person to that. And so we did have communities that did not have aid immediately. But those communities had ways of living that would mean that they knew how a community should be able to come together. And they were not alone. Right? They were connected to people from other islands. They literally brought in goods by canoe and by boat to shorelines that have no places for the boats to go to. And lines of people would go out into the water and they would hand the packages over their heads. And the people on the other islands would know that that's what they would have to do. So they packed everything in watertight containers that would be light enough to go head over head if you had to do that. And they were already marked, so you didn't have to go and open it up to see what it is. Here comes extra large men's underwear coming over, right? And they would go and they would do that. Right? And so you say that the rebuilding of community and the ways in which we live will allow us to get to that moment where we will have achieved justice, not required people who were unjust to us make us whole. How could that ever happen? How could that ever happen? The rain comes at the proper moment. We queued it up. Yes.
I think what you just said and how you explained it to her doesn't just apply to what, I mean, it's bigger than just the answer to the question. I'm referring it to looking at my life and saying, oh, well, yeah, that could be it. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I promised Jimmy that we would do some meditation. It won't be 45 minutes, eyes wide open, looking at each other, slowly also. Okay? I promise we won't do that.
Before you start the meditation, well, first of all, I really appreciate all that you're teaching us today. It's absolutely wonderful. And I have been teaching what's called mindfulness-based resurrection for about 20 years. And it wasn't until the last 9 or 10 years that I really started to understand the concept of anatta, and not self, and how I have found it so key to the alleviation of suffering within myself and to those that I work with. And I'm just wondering, and it also leads to the breakdown of separation and a sense of oneness. And is that a concept or a principle that you work with in Zen, anatta, not self?
Yes, it's a principle work with. The other principle that's really connected closely is sunyata, like the emptiness.
Yeah.
It's very connected to that. The sutra that's chanted in almost every Buddhist temple in the world would be the Makanya Haramita Shingyo, like the Hajna Haramita sutra, which is centered around like it's centered around the emptiness that would be required in order for suffering to not become who it is that you are, right? But just being what it is, which is not a negation of the suffering, like that, and whatnot. I didn't bring it with me, but I'll send it to you too if you'd like to distribute it. So I shared this with John. The last several years, I was working on a Hawaiian version for the Makanya Haramita Shingyo. I was inspired by, there is a Hawaiian version of the Metta chant of the Vipassana tradition, and I was inspired by that, and so I started to look at how it is we might put together a Hawaiian version for the Project Madamika. And so I read over 100 very bad translations and realized that at the time that the translations were made, in whatever, I even read translations, I sat down with Chinese people to read the Chinese translation to me, because I can't read Chinese. And I realized that even that close to it, that they weren't really in the experience of it, they were analyzing it. And so what I had was 100 analysis of the Project Paramita. And if you turn an analysis into a chant, it just sounds junk. And so, so I pondered it and then whatnot, and then this is what, okay, I have to just take my experience of it and then set aside the translations and just write a poem of the experience. And then I went to a friend, Dr. Yapu Pereira, who is a Native Hawaiian teacher on the Big Island of Hawaii, whose specialty is oratory, and asked him to do the translation. And so I now have a version of it. One of the sections in this poem basically speaks to this notion of suffering. And we use the word. So there are two Hawaiian words for suffering: pu'umamina and pu'u'eha. Pu'umamina is the suffering. Pu'u'eha is the lament that comes from suffering. And both of these are included in this particular chant. And the notion is that the suffering that we feel, the suffering of our people, isn't who it is we are. It is just suffering. The notion that you have to actually come to that place where if you become that, then you will, among other things, you lose your agency in the world. Right? And if you lose your agency in the world, then you will, you may fight for justice, but it will require others to give you justice. And the justice that other people can give to you will never be as satisfying as the one that you can create with respect to the wholeness of who your people can be. So the parallel with the sunyata, which is confounded many hundreds of generations of Buddhists, the sunyata, emptiness, right? What does that mean? Which is not the same as mu, the void. It's sometimes conflated. And then I stumbled upon the fact that for the Chinese and the Japanese, when they learned of the concept sunyata, the character that represents that is also the character for sky. Well then, of course, it's simple. Right? All you have to do to experience that notion of emptiness is to become the sky. And experience the sky. The bigness, the vastness, the openness, the way in which it is so vast, it includes everything, right? But is never filled. Right? It's never filled up like a vessel. And so that it's the living notion of it rather than the metaphysical construct. Not as useful as a metaphysical construct, more useful as the experience of sky. So.
In personal practice, I know that non-identification let's say with an emotion, because then we can get stuck. Oh, I'm angry, I'm identifying with anger versus anger is with me, and then we're outside of it, not the condition itself, and then we can see the impermanence of it as it goes.
If we have practices that will allow it to evaporate. So I work with a number of, so I haven't been removed entirely from politics, as you might imagine. I work with a lot of activists who do a lot of very hard and important and sometimes dangerous work. People who help immigrants without papers, and rescue people who have been abused, and all kinds of things, right? And it's very easy for people, they can cause entire movements to occur fueled by anger. My caution to them is that anger is fire, and fire cannot be controlled. And so when you deal with fire, fire can consume you. When you consume you, then no matter how righteous it is your cause might be, you will lose your ability to see the way forward. You'll only be fighting within the fight of the anger. So we say, don't allow that. It is natural to be angry, but be careful of the kinds of things you do to keep feeding the anger, right? Okay, which actually has become like a way for entire movements to exist, okay, and succeed, which is also part of the problem. You can get lots of funding from philanthropy for this thing or that thing, based on how many people you show up who are righteously angry. And say that anger, we should be angry by what happens, but that if we continue to feed that in ourselves, then among other things, right, we're giving growth to our amygdala, right, the part of the brain that we have in common with the reptiles, right? We call it reptile brain sometimes, right? The fight or flight function. And recent studies have shown that literally when your amygdala is fully lit up, your prefrontal cortex goes dark. Right? That means that when you're in the fullness of your anger, in that fight-flight response, you lose your executive function. And you cannot make choices, let alone complex choices in that moment. And life requires us right now to make complex choices. It just does. It just does. And so, to be able to see both opportunity and danger, and to not mistake one for the other, and to move into the places where possibilities are opening up before they're upon you. All of that requires us to be to be in the fullness of our agency. So to live in that place. So we do breathing practices with each other. And I'm really watching to see where they're listening to me from. Are they listening to me in their full body experience, or are they listening to me in their head? Right, just in their head. Right? Just in your head, you're not going to be that potent. Do you mind doing a demonstration with me, John?
No.
Okay, so John's gonna excuse me, it's a little bit, I swear that a little bit, it's a little bit sticky, so, but you wash your hands before you eat anyway, right? So you're gonna just put your hand on my head like this, right? Okay, so it's gonna do that. Okay, now for me to make progress with John, it's not gonna be that much if I'm just gonna be operating from my head. Okay, it's just not. He can even hold me just by doing that, right? So he does that. Just go ahead. Right? Yeah, he can do that. Okay, this is not going to get me. Even if he just puts a finger here, if he puts a finger here, right? I can lean in, but that's about all I can do. that's basically about it. Okay. Now, if we go like this, right, and we just try to go with each other, against each other, just try to dance towards the walk, walk. Okay, what will happen is we'll come to a standstill, right? We'll exert a lot of effort to do that. Okay, exert a lot of effort to do that. Okay, but if he does it here, basically, okay, if I'm connected to him, okay, like this, if I'm connected to him from the core of where I am, okay, basically, right, and I need to go in that direction. If we're connected at the core, like basically, I can move him. Okay, right? I'll be able to do that. Okay, so if I want to be connected, I have to be connected. You cannot connect to ideas or to actions. You actually have to be connected at the core, have an experience of that. Okay, thanks, Jeff. So we would do things like that, but we don't simply do breathing. We might do a little breathing to end. Can we do a little breathing to end? Okay, we do that. Do a little breathing.
Before you get
Oh,
into
okay.
that, connected to your, attached to your agenda, there's a little quotation there and there. Can somebody read that to me? I don't have a copy of that. Yeah.
We're holding back the tide of darkness, but that does not mean we're creating light.
So Norma wrote that long ago.
Long ago.
She doesn't remember when, but it was long ago. You,
Yeah.
you want to kind of share with us what came to you when you were writing that?
Yeah, so this is related to the question we had today. Right? So, is that we're shining the light more and more on things, but in order for us to, well, not even create a better world, but to deal with the collapse that's occurring right now. And the world is as it gets warmer, I believe that it has impacted humans to the extent where we are mostly not in our right mind. Okay, right? I mean, it's like, just think about it, right? If we have millions of people who are suffering greatly from the heat and who are fleeing that, and we're holding them back at the border. For example, right? Like, they are probably more sane than we are, because what they're fleeing are places that are not habitable anymore. Not only because of the heat, but because the heat has caused drought, and the drought has caused fighting, and fighting has caused war. And there are places that civil society has dropped off, and so therefore they're doing the thing that you should do. You should run away, and they don't have a place to run to, but they are running away. They are actually logical in their movement. Okay? Now, we're barely keeping society together right now, and reading about current events in terms of even just the political events, let alone anything else, wouldn't give you a lot of comfort, right? I think we're barely holding back the darkness at this point in terms of acting civilly towards each other. I think we don't get past this point unless we leap beyond the fighting and we create things on the other side of it. In other words, that which we know is breaking apart may or may not be able to be saved. But as it is disintegrating, what are we creating that would allow us to move from what is disintegrating to what is going to be more fruitful and thriving. You know, I tell this to activists all the time. If you have a beef with capitalism, don't keep having a beef with capitalism. Come up with ways where larger and larger groups of society don't have to depend on it. Right? Okay? Which, by the way, we're probably going to need to. Right? We already know that in times of stress, those things have minimal capacity. Archie Kalepa and his community would not be able to buy the things that they needed. There was no place to buy them from. Right? So therefore, right, the community had to rise, and even though money was raised, almost everything that ended up at Leali'i Homestead was not purchased. Because, right, people basically, oh, I have this, I have that, I don't have that, but you have that. Can you get that to me and get that to you, right? You know, right, in that particular way, right? And it occurred, which means that, you know, during the pandemic, right, many people were fed not through informal systems. A truck went up and down my street, and with you know, teenage boys in it, where the parents, I'm sure, just didn't want them in the house anymore. And it was during the time that we thought that teenagers would be immune to COVID. Remember that time? Mm-hmm. And so they went down the street and they go, "Auntie, uncle, you need rice. We have rice. You want white rice, brown rice, or the kind somebody gave us basmati rice?" Right? And they just went up and down the street, seeing whether or not, you know, the white-haired people needed anything, right? Because they could. So, creating the world we want versus holding back the tide of the things we don't want, to me, is like the way in which we face the light. That's the way we face the light.
Thank you.